Assassin from Another World, Chapter 2, First Part. To be honest, Lurie was wandering willy-nilly. The place was just too huge, and he had no idea where Vera and Dust might be. A vast hall without a single person in it spread before Lurie. A small airfield would easily fit inside it. On all sides of him was stone, but the surprising thing was that there wasn't a single seam in the walls, floor, or ceiling. This place had been hollowed out of the rock. He'd thought about turning back, but the door had shut just seconds after he entered, and now it wouldn't budge at all. This was a one-way street. The room didn't allow you to exit again. Shaking his head, Lurie cleared it of all thoughts of going back, right up until the time he vanished. Shaking his head, Lurie cleared it of all thoughts of going back. Right up until the time he vanished, his father had kept telling him, "Don't look back, son. Taking the long way around is fine, but don't look back. If you look back, you'll want to turn back, and that keeps you from moving forward. The important things always lie ahead." Along with Cray, the boy had been brought back outside. The cells had been opened and the two of them freed by a shadow cast on the floor. Or perhaps it would be better to describe it as something like a shadow. As it had no substance, it was difficult to make that call. Two parts of the black mass had stretched like hands through the bars to grab both of them by the ankles. An instant later, they were both outside the castle. Their backpacks had also generously been left there. The snowstorm had abated, and stars blinked in the darkened sky. If they wanted to make a run for it looked like their chances were good. However, that's not what the two of them had done. "I'm going back in," Cray had murmured as he gazed at the towering castle walls about 100 yards away, seeming to gnaw the words off. His right hand gripped a knife. Whether it was the one he'd been carrying, or a new one that had been stashed in his belongings was unclear. "Squirt. Get while the getting's good. I'll raise a ruckus so no one goes after you." At Cray's words, Lurie had shaken his head, saying, "I'm going back too." "Why on earth—" "Mr. Cray, are you going back to rescue Miss Vera and Mr. Dust?" When those clear, innocent eyes looked straight at him, the outlaw grew embarrassed. "Well, actually, you know how it is, right? So you won't go look for them, will you?" "I don't say it like that, it's just... That's why I'm going back. Hey, we didn't come up here to rescue anyone. That's just their fate. In a situation like this, you've got to think of yourself first, am I right?" "Mr. Cray, why are you going back to the castle?" "Well, I've got a reason." "Well, I've got reasons a kid wouldn't understand, you little dope." "If you're going back into that castle, Mr. Cray, I think it must be a pretty important reason. Do what you have to do, but I can't leave those two behind." "Squirt, how can you feel so much responsibility when you're still just a little kid? And the weight of it's gonna crush you. Besides, what do you think you can accomplish going back to that castle alone? It's better than doing nothing." Cray glared at the boy. He quickly said, "Okay, do as you like. I'll stick with you till we've snuck in, but if you run into that shadow that saved you, you be sure to thank it all proper like, okay?" "Of course." And so the two of them returned to the castle. The nearest wall had a rusted iron door set in it. "Guess I don't have much choice, do I?" Cray said, drawing his knife. "Don't screw with me, you two-bit noble." His right hand flashed out. All the boy saw was a white streak like a shooting star. The lock portion of the iron door was cut out in a neat square. As soon as they were in, the pair split up. "I'm going upstairs. Want to come along?" Cray invited the boy, but he shook his head. Though he had no way of knowing for sure, he suspected the prison could only be underground. Descending staircases and getting on moving sidewalks, Laurie traveled down farther and farther. And now, after stone walls and corridors as far as the eye could see, he was in an empty hall. There was no point in just standing around. Laurie began walking toward the center of the room. The enormous weight of the rock seemed to press down on its diminutive form from all sides. And time and again, Laurie had to take a deep breath. When he'd more or less reached the center, Laurie saw a rectangular hole open in the floor before him. A section 15 feet long and 10 feet wide had suddenly subsided. That was the impression he got. Though he was poised to run off at any moment, his eyes were drawn to the hole. Page break. He had found no escalators or elevators, and the stairway simply went on forever. So Cray finally sat himself down cross-legged in the middle of the stairs. Sweat dripped from him in endless streams, but he didn't even have time to spare for noticing how unpleasant that felt, as his lungs gulped for air. Someone was coming down from above. Wiping his sweat-stung eyes, Cray looked up the stairs to where they dissolved into darkness. A faceless creature with 4 arms was coming down. Its mask and garments, even its body that looked like intertwined wires, were all silvery gray, with its cape alone being crimson. The inscribed baton it carried to its right drew Cray's gaze. It was a weapon. Power instinctively flooded into the outlaw's legs and drained from his upper body. Just 20 steps above him, the figure in the crimson cape halted. The baton in one of its right hands grew with a swish. It was a long spear. Tension knifed through every inch of Cray, becoming a will to fight that set him ablaze. Aware that his breathing was growing heavier, he turned his body into a spring and bounded off to his right. "Come and get me," he shouted. Page break. Dee stood before the door. His gait hadn't faltered once as he traveled there, as if this had been his goal from the very start. "I don't know either. What's behind this thing?" The words of his left hand were overlaid with the sound of a door opening and closing. Dee went inside. It was a vast hall. Save for a few exceptions, it was a plain of stone as far as the eye could see. The exceptions were clustered near the center of the hall. There were 3 figures. A short one was sandwiched between a taller figure, squaring off against a giant. 2 of them the hunter recognized. The short one, Laurie, and the figure in the golden cape that towered before him. "What's that bastard Gilson doing here?" No sooner had the hoarse voice muttered that than the figures, who'd been halted like a movie still, went into motion in unison. The one on the other side of Laurie, a figure in a featureless mask wearing a green cape, made a horizontal sweep of its right hand. The baton grasped in a fist that looked like twisted wire grew to over 15 feet in length. mowing through Gilson's neck. Sparks flew. Gilson's right hand, and the gold scepter it carried, had parried the blow. Both actions had occurred with a speed imperceptible to the naked eye. Dee alone had caught them. The gleam of the opponent's weapon drew back, then came at the nobleman again, this time falling from above as if splitting firewood. Gilson dodged it, changing his stance. But a split second before he did so, the long spear slashed up at him from below. It looked as if the nobleman was constantly on the defensive. The movements of the two were succinct, with crimson sparks glowing incessantly in the gloom. Minute piled upon minute, with Gilson always on the receiving end.
His opponent's not bad either. It's keeping the same Gilson who defeated you on the defensive,
the hoarse voice said, making sure to place special emphasis on the "who defeated you" part. But then it let out a gasp of surprise. Changing his footwork, Gilson halted for a moment. Not missing that chance, his foe whipped its long spear round in a flashing arc, which Gilson dipped at an angle to avert. His bizarre ribbed sword then bursting from his torso and stabbing into his opponent's abdomen at an angle. Letting out a cry that fell short of words, the nobleman's foe swung its long spear, severing the stark implement of death before the creature made a great leap back.
"Looks like the tide has turned,"
the hoarse voice said, its words surging forward. Gilson pursued his foe, while Louis remained where he was. Like a swallow in flight, Dee dashed over and scooped up the diminutive figure, pulling him back out of the heat of battle. First part, end.